Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, makes a startling admission when asked a straightforward question about impeachment. Why are you impeaching Trump now, but you wouldn't impeach George Bush after he invaded Iraq? Now, I've asked that question. I've made the point that if it's okay for the president to lie, invade a country, kill swaths of people, meaning by any notion of the term, George Bush has killed more people than pretty much anybody else in our current time frame, and he goes and just go finger painting. And he says there are no consequence for this, and Nancy Pelosi says no. And then Obama gets in, he says we're looking forward, we're not looking back. We were looking forward to more drone bombings and more invasions in other countries. Looking back in order to prosecute the person that did it? No. The truth is, the moment that you prosecute Bush, any other future president that gets caught engaging in that behavior that even a Democrat may find themselves engaging in, that person should be subjected to the same terms, right? If you prosecute one, you potentially have to prosecute others, and that's not something Pelosi wanted to do. Now, her excuse is, I didn't want this to be the way going forward. They prosecute Clinton for a blowjob, and then we go after Bush. But there's a dramatic difference between going after Clinton for a blowjob in this kind of witch hunt versus going after Bush for something he actually did. He was responsible for that. I understand we get hit on 9/11, but Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with that. And yet, he pivoted the country into a way of this neocon dream of reshaping the Middle East. He was guilty of sin. If any other country did that, if any other country even came close to invading its neighbor in this kind of, oh, we're invading them because they had something to do with X or Y, or they have nuclear weapons, or whatever the evolving story became, and you end up with 1 million people being dead as a result of such, and chaos sweeping throughout the Middle East as a result of such, there was no way we tolerate it. And if there was an African nation, that guy would be dragged before The Hague with his head chopped off. But we have special privileges. And the organs in the country that are supposed to hold the president responsible so that president doesn't become a king stayed mute. Stayed mute. M-U-T-E. Let's hear Pelosi talk about this. This is a startling admission that Nancy Pelosi makes. And I don't even know if she realizes how mind-blowing what she's saying is. I often find that congressional members have this detachment from what these guys do and what happens in an objective world. It's almost as if they press a button and the button goes to nowhere. The button doesn't go to nowhere. They're making rules and laws and decisions. And some of those decisions have to do with accountability so that decision doesn't get replicated, especially when the country itself deems it as to being horrible. And yet we don't. We don't deem our warmongers as such. We don't deem our butchers as such. And yet we will say Assad is an evil dictator. He's a butcher and he kills his own people and all this other stuff. What about us? We kill other people. Does that make it better? Especially if you don't hold these leaders accountable. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, this video won't be long. I saw this clip and it enraged me to no end. It's almost as if the consequences of our actions don't factor into the debate. That's what it is. The consequences of our actions don't factor into the debate. Let's hear Nancy Pelosi explain why it's okay to go after Trump for Ukraine-gate. And I have to be honest, I heard some of these witnesses, and these guys were being shredded. Sunderland got eaten alive. Now, but that's not stuff that they focus on. They focus on the other stuff. They glamorize the other stuff. CNN runs out. MSNBC runs out. They put all these splashy headlines. When Sunderland got eaten alive, I guarantee you that wasn't one of the headlines. Let's hear Nancy Pelosi explain why Bush invading a country, being responsible for the deaths of over 1 million people. We've been in wars for the last, 18, 19 years, starting off drone bombing, creating a gulag off of our coast that is outside of our laws, instituting a torture program with black sites all over the place. Not to mention the 4,000 Americans that died and the $7 trillion spent for it. Now, Nancy Pelosi is going to explain to you why lying for all of that stuff to take place, meaning all of that stuff happened because of a lie by a U.S. president. And her argument is, I knew Bush was lying. I knew he was lying. But, we didn't do impeachment. Let's hear her talk about it. And this is a horrendous answer.
Speaker Pelosi, you resisted calls for the impeachment of President Bush in 2006 and President Trump following the Mueller report earlier this year. This time is different. Why did you oppose impeachment in the past? And what is your obligation to protect our democracy from the actions of our president now?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up the question because when I became Speaker the first time, there was overwhelming call for me to impeach President Bush on the strength of the war in Iraq, which I vehemently opposed. And I have said it other places. That was my wheelhouse. I was intelligence. I was the ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, even before I became part of the leadership of Gang of Four. So I knew there were no nuclear weapons in Iraq. It just wasn't there. They had to show us. They had to show the Gang of Four all the intelligence they had. The intelligence did not show that that was the case.
Effectively, I knew he was lying. I knew he was lying. I knew he was full of shit. They didn't have what they said he had, despite the fact that they would go on and they would boost the stuff like they were weapons of mass destruction. There was just a paper released from the Washington Post today saying that the military under Obama and Bush were lying through their teeth about what was taking place in Afghanistan. That they were, for the most part, incapable of achieving the missions that they were setting, despite the fact that they would tell the public, we're almost there, we're doing great, things are going just fucking awesome. Things are going awesome. And the media would just accept it. Well, they said that things are going awesome, so we got to trust these guys. And it's like, do you think they would tell you if they weren't? Do you think they would tell you if they weren't? Or if they were telling you, it would be for manipulative purposes, because for the most part, that stuff is a black box and they tell you what they need in order to get the reaction that they need out of you. Lying flagrantly. Now, Nancy Pelosi is like, yeah, I knew he was lying about it. Now, I am pointing out to you, heft all of that against the consequences of Bush's actions. Bush was responsible for the deaths of 1 million Iraqis. They did nothing to us. They didn't attack us one iota. They were, for all intents and purposes, innocent for the crime to which they were charged. And that didn't stop them from being wiped off the face of the earth. And there's no consequence. How is there no consequence for this? What does 1 million bodies look like just piled up on the streets? That's what we did. We outright destabilized that region. And then for whatever reason, despite all of the chaos, all of the trauma, the team and the group that was supposed to hold them responsible, her, accepts that Bush was lying, accepts that all of the consequences was a result of those lies. Millions of people displaced, for all intents and purposes murdered, especially since he was lying. Not to mention our own forces and the money spent. And Nancy Pelosi says, yeah, I knew he was lying from jump.
So I knew it was a misrepresentation to the public. But having said that, it was in my view, not a ground for impeachment. They won the election, they made a representation, and to this day, people think that it was the right thing to do.
How is that not grounds for impeachment? How is that not? Torture is against the law. Just as a flat fact, torture is against the law. When the president comes out and says, yeah, damn right I said waterboard, that is the president owning up to torture. You yourself said you knew he was lying when he dragged this country into a war that ends up killing 1 million people, wiping them off the face of the earth. Those people weren't guilty of any crime to which they were accused of. You knew he was lying. It's almost as if they have no value. How do you have no value in this process? Imagine a black kid getting shot, the cop getting off. Why is there anger in this moment? Why is there anger? There's anger because of the vestiges of racism where the people don't necessarily know if in that cop's head that cop was looking at the world in a way that was looking at that kid as something other than that kid was, meaning he's looking at the kid as a predator when that kid is having iced tea. And it's also this issue of no accountability for it, meaning the kid's life had no value because you could just wipe it off the face of the earth without there being any consequences. What does that mean to the tune of 1 million people? I don't think this is trivial. I think this is kind of part of the problem. We look at ourselves in a particular way and drops the context of how other people see us. In this very specific moment, we are talking about destroying a country on the pretense of a lie, and that the opposition party knows it's a lie. And instead of heeding calls to impeach that motherfucker, to take it from Rashid Tlaib, which would have been a clear violation, a clear reason for impeachment. How is not wiping 1 million people off the planet not an impeachable offense, especially if the reason he's doing is not to protect us? He lied us into a war. And now she's saying, we got to get Trump. We got to get Trump. But Bush, I didn't think that was impeachable. Let her keep going.
The people think that Iraq had something to do with 9/11. I mean, it's appalling what they did. But I did, and I said, if somebody wants to make a case, you bring it forward. But they had impeached Bill Clinton for personal indiscretion and misrepresenting about it. Impeached him. Some of these same people are saying, oh, this doesn't rise to impeachment.
You know, some of these same people are also telling me, you got to follow the law. You got to follow the law. You talk to Democrats and they would say, well, I mean, he broke the law, so you got to follow the law. It's not that we want impeachment. You got to follow the law. What about this? What about this? How does it not apply here? You got to follow the law, Nancy. You got to follow the law. But that's just it. Impeachment is a subjective quantity. It's just like them going after Bill Clinton for a blowjob. But this is not, in this case, subjective. There are 1 million people no longer on this planet as a result of that regime's, Bush's actions. And the organ that was supposed to be able to hold them accountable is sitting here now saying, well, I mean, I didn't think that, those 1 million people dying rose to the level of an impeachable defense and him lying us into a war and the 4,000 Americans that died in the gulag that was out back and the torture program that we were using in the various black sites. I didn't think all of that rose to an impeachable offense. But Trump. And then they would say, you got to follow the law. And she's going to worm her way around to, we got to follow the law. This is not what I wanted. We just have to follow the law. You didn't have to follow the law back then? Torture is against the law. You didn't have to follow the law back then? This is a ludicrous answer. You let a man off, a mass murderer off. He's out there fingerprinting right now in his footy pajamas. Think of the world that we've inhabited from George Bush. And think of the people who didn't hold him accountable. The Pelosis, the Obamas. And understand that your world, as it goes forward, you've allowed an imperial president, because ultimately this gives a de facto pardon for a president that wants to go gallivanting around the world, be it Obama or be it, to a lesser extent, I suppose, depending on whether or not he attacks Iran, Trump. This is an astonishing answer. You want to know why you ended up with Trump today? It's stuff like this. Do you know Gina Haspel, bloody Gina Haspel, the person who was torturing, she's now back in office. She's head of the CIA. Do you think Gina Haspel becomes head of the CIA if Bush and his cronies that were involved in that war got impeached? Do you know that war crimes, the ICC was going after elements looking into war crimes of what took place in Afghanistan? Now, we are not signatories. No, we're not. But Afghanistan is. And if the country is a signatory, then they can be looked into. John Bolton took time to attack the ICC in order to prevent any looking into the dealings of the United States military, especially his own head. She has to lose. I'm sorry, she has to lose. She's entirely ineffective in that particular post. And I gotta be honest, to come out and say that, yeah, I didn't think the 1 million people dead, the 4,000 Americans that died, and the gulag prison and the torture and the black sites. I didn't think all of that mattered as much in comparison to, going through with the impeachment and all. Heavy lift. And they went after Bill Clinton for a blowjob, and I just didn't want it to be a funhouse. So wait, 1 million people can die and you're okay with it? If your name is Nancy Pelosi, it doesn't matter that much to you, apparently. And so for her, it's okay. That is extraordinary. That's extraordinary. What do you think is more important? Be honest. Be honest. One, they tried to impeach Trump from day one. So this is an entirely partisan act. Two, the people who are coming forward are leakers. These are people like elements of the CIA, whatever, who just hated Trump and wanted to get him out. Three, all credibility went away with the Mueller report. Because even after that report, you still have Democrats screaming, he's a Russian bot, he's a Russian agent, all of this other nonsense, missing the fact that what he's doing is against Russian interests across the board on a host of issues. And now they have Ukraine-gate. Ukraine-gate. This is impeachable, apparently. Ukraine-gate is impeachable. The aid that Obama didn't give, meaning didn't give weapons, but apparently Trump supposedly hurt U.S. foreign policy, nor do they ever actually question or whether or not we should be engaging Ukraine in this particular way, or for that matter, U.S. foreign policy regarding NATO for the past 20 years. None of that comes up. All of this is just the surface level war politics stuff. So, fair enough. Ukraine-gate. Let's go bonkers. Trump pressured the other team for information on Joe Biden for the race. Now, suppose for the moment Joe Biden wasn't running in the race. Would it have been wrong for the president to question whether or not there were misdealings in the last administration? I don't think that's wrong at all. It depends on whether or not the misdealings are real and the reason why the president is asking. I don't believe Trump's motives are all that entirely clean. By the same token, I don't think you have them in this pressuring stuff in the way that you think he does, especially with the cross-examinations from Republicans. But heft that against 1 million dead, torture, black sites in order to do this torture, both of which are against our laws, or at the very least torture is against our laws, a gulag that is outside of our laws, that have been instrumental in this torture. I mean, they made videos about this stuff in order to get people involved. 4,000 dead Americans. And what was the other one? $7 trillion. Not to mention the breaks, the family members of these dead Americans, the family members of the million dead Iraqis, the war that we are still fighting to this day, 18 years later, after the breaking of the Middle East. Heft all of that against the Ukraine-gate. And she says, I didn't think it was an impeachable offense. But it's Ukraine-gate, all clear. That's totally clear. All of this is not an impeachable offense, but the Ukraine-gate stuff is. I'm sorry, that's farcical. And this is kind of my point about losing this notion of credibility with me. Life is always more important. Life is more important than your Ukraine-gate stuff. And ultimately, we killed over 1 million people. And in your head, the guy who did that on a lie that you say you knew was a lie, he's out there in his footy pajamas. And you're calling it, I don't think that was impeachable. I find that to be extraordinary. You should be ashamed of yourself. Primal, unrelated note, this week I learned that William Barr used alias Robert Johnson during the Iran-Contra CIA drug weapons tracking error. No fucking way. Are you serious? Trudy, so you never get to hold a president to account because Bush, etc. were not held to account. No, it's not that. It's that I can look at the political process and say this is a partisan act. And that this particular partisan act is being done because it's Trump. They just hate his guts. Whereas with Bush, the same people involved didn't believe that Bush should be impeached. I find that farcical. That's like Lula. You have 10 people who are guilty of sin, and the political process looks at Lula and says, we're going to prosecute you. Now, did Lula do anything? Doubtful, but let's say he did. The fact that the political system itself is making a choice for political reasons, meaning prosecution for political reasons, calls the whole thing into question. Is he guilty? I don't know. Are these other guys guilty? Yes. And yet you're picking out him. I'm saying that's a problem with that process. And you have to look beyond that process and say this is a political act. They're doing this for partisan reasons. And I got to be honest, Trudy, I don't even think it's going to be successful. Meaning, from a political standpoint, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris are going to be stuck in Congress for the next X number of weeks where they should be on the campaign trail. And beyond that point, you're not going to get the Republicans on board. You're just not. You're not. And so it comes across as what it is, a partisan act to take down a president. And this is after trying to take down that president in a soft coup. It lacks credibility. It just does. It lacks credibility. It lacks credibility. If you get him on something legit, fair enough. But this is nonsense. I'm sorry. I don't buy into this process at all. I don't even care about this process at this point. The Democratic Party has lost all credibility on this. And for Nancy Pelosi to look you in the eye in this kind of weird, out of sync way and say, well, all of the crimes that Bush was committed didn't amount to impeachable to me, but what Trump did does. That's lunacy. That's lunacy. It is fucking legit. I know you. I disagree with you, Trudy. I disagree with you. I've watched some of the hearings. Do I believe that Trump might have pushed Zelensky to get information on Biden from the standpoint of an investigation? Yes, maybe. Do I believe he did that to the letter of the law? Meaning, what I believe is secondary to what they need to prove in this hearing. And unfortunately, the people who are trying to prove it are biased actors. What's his name got caught lying early on in this process? Adam Schiff. I don't know why I should give this legitimacy. I don't know why. I got to be honest. I don't care. If you want to censure Trump for this, fair enough. But trying to take him out of office just goes right in line with what they said they were going to do in the beginning. They never accepted the election results. And I'm not going to reward them for not accepting the election results. Just saying. Just saying. I don't care about the accusers. I care about the crime. Yes, Trudy, I understand that. But I get it. You hate Trump. I don't particularly like Trump either. What I don't want is a kangaroo system where, I'll give you an example. Brazil. The other member of the Workers' Families Party, I can't think of her name. She gets taken out in a coup, a soft coup. She's taken out of office. You have all of these people who are standing around who are guilty of sin, but they use the legal system to get rid of her. Now you can say, well, I don't really care about who's the accuser, I care about the crime. Where in this case, the accuser was the government, the accuser was working with a particular political faction, and the accuser used what may or may not have been a crime to remove one person while keeping the others. Now, if the government is doing that, then they don't care about the crime. Now you could say, I care only about the crime, I don't care who the accuser is, but your government at that point is using the political space in order to or the legal space to get rid of political opponents. They do the same thing to Lula when he's running, to knock him off of the political perch. You can say, I care about the crime, I don't care about the accusers, but right in this case, the accusers were the ones that are picking and choosing who they were going to use the legal apparatus on to knock out of the way so their guy can get in office. You should care about the accuser. The accuser is vitally important because the accuser may be accusing somebody of something that wasn't actually a crime. Impeachment is a political process. They're choosing to do this. But they were trying to do this with the Mueller report, which was nonsense. And beyond the Mueller report showing that Trump didn't do what they were accusing him of for 2 years, they ignored that report and still blew past it and still called the guy a Russian agent. And now you have Ukraine-gate. And a lot of what they're screaming about is Trump not giving weapons to Ukraine, something that Obama didn't even do. Trudy, I don't buy into this. Trump is vindictive, thin-skinned punk. Yes, that's true. he wants to hurt Biden because he's doing well in the polls. That's also probably true. The problem here is the Democratic Party did the same thing with Ukraine. I mean, for fuck's sake. When Politico came out with their article talking about the Democratic operative who was working to get information to leak in order to hurt Manafort, and just so happened they leaked that information. Just so happened the government was submissive to the U.S. whims. And the media now goes and says, that's not true. No, it is true. It's absolutely true. They just don't like the story. They want to protect Biden. I'm sorry. You can't have the Democratic Party to get away with something, and then Trump tries it, and then the media flips out. This goes back to my point of credibility. It seems when it happens with one, they pay attention. When it happens with the other, they don't. I don't buy into this process. This is an unequal distribution of the way the legal system is being used. I don't like Trump either. By the same token, what's one happens to one should happen to the other. And that investigation should go into whether or not the DNC was working with the Ukrainian government. But that doesn't happen per se. I know Barr and Durham are looking into that stuff, but it just seems like there's acute attention to one person, who I agree is an ogre, while letting the other slide. And it makes me distrust the process, because that can happen to anybody. Whoever's not within the established patina of light, then they're fair game to get attacked and maligned by media. And for that point, even from the standpoint of having people not being able to trust who's in their administration because those people leak and all this other stuff. I don't doubt that Trump was looking for some way to hurt Biden. Does it rise to the level of impeachment? No. Does 1 million people being killed rise to the level of impeachment? Yes. 1,000 times yes. And if you're making an argument to me that, and I mean this from the standpoint of Nancy Pelosi, that all of these crimes, torture, black sites, gulags, 4,000 Americans dead, 1 million Iraqis killed, wars in the next 7 countries that we're still into this day, the creation of ISIS. If you're trying to make the argument to me that all of that doesn't rise to the level of impeachment, but Ukrainegate does, I'm going to think you're insane. And yet this is what Nancy Pelosi is trying to get us to believe. I'm going to go back to watching the hearings so I would know what the fuck I'm talking about instead of just... Look, the hearings are as boring as... I sat there and watched those hearings for hours. And I remember hearing Gordon Sunderland, and they were like, we got him, we got him, we got him. This is the thing that puts Trump away. This is the thing that puts Trump away. And then, that's on CNN and MSNBC. And then I hear Fox. And Fox has a secondary reading that I didn't hear in the other networks. And they asked him basically, he got eviscerated. Like, Sunderland got eaten alive. And yet the media was running as if this is a slam dunk. Sunderland, they asked him, he says, I presumed it to be true. Here's the thing. His presumption might have been right. But now that we're in this process of kind of legalese stuff, it matters. It matters. You just told me that you didn't let a guy off who was responsible for the deaths of 1 million people. That is more deaths than pretty much anybody in our lifetime, being that Bush is responsible for taking off this planet. But Ukrainegate. Everyone knew it was true. Trudy, I think you misunderstand what I mean. I don't doubt that Trump tried to pressure Zelensky for information on Biden. No doubt. Not the shallow of a doubt. By the same token, I don't agree with this impeachment hearing. And if you want to censure Trump and all that stuff, fair enough. But taking him out of office when you have an election coming up next year seems ludicrous to me. And yet, this seems to be what they are trying to do. And they're going to fail in that task, meaning it doesn't make good politics because you don't seem to be winning on the politics. The public is checked out. Nor is it attuned for electoral success. It's a lose-lose. And it's a lose-lose in part because the Democratic Party has never accepted the election results. It's not so much that I think Trump didn't do it. It's more so that they need to prove it in a legal sense. And even if they do, the secondary question of, is this worth taking him out of office? Especially when there's an election coming up next year and the parties or the people can choose what they want. Pelosi said in that video, well, the public put him in office. Well, the same thing is true here. That's why that conversation is ludicrous to me. The same arguments that she's making against impeachment then still hold true now. They still hold true now. So what's the difference? It's Trump. He's an ogre. We don't like him. We hate him. We hate him. That's why. That's why. Wesley Walker Jr. If Trump was impeached today, what would it mean for the chance at a Sanders presidency? They're desperate. This may be another angle to stop Sanders. Well, if Trump gets impeached, then it goes to the Senate. This is the Republican territory. Republicans set this up the way they want. Sanders, Harris, Warren would need to be in the Senate for the duration of that particular hearing. The Republicans are not peeling off. They didn't peel off. The Democrats' plan to try to get Republicans to leave Trump after these hearings didn't work. And again, many of these people got eviscerated with a cross-examination by the Republican Party. I just so happened to got to watch a lot of that, at least for one day. And then at the radio station, we were playing through clips essentially the entire time. I don't agree with this process. And I don't even think it helps. If anything, it changes the narrative away from Trump failed to they never accepted my election. Those are different feelings. Not to mention, you look at the donations, the differential between who's donating to the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party, where the Republican Party got $130 million. Not to mention even the RNC versus the DNC. The DNC is in debt. The Republican Party has like 6 times as much as they have. These are warning signs. Even the polling gets across that, look, this doesn't look good for you. Meaning, if you're looking at this just as we got to follow the law, we got to follow the law, that wasn't something that was true back then when Bush invaded the country. But okay, now you feel like you got to follow the law because it's Trump. It's not consistent. It's a funhouse. They're doing this entirely for political reasons that changes depending upon the political dynamics. There's no consistency to this process. This is kind of the point that I'm getting, Trudy. The credibility in this is lacking. How do you have a law that changes according to the person? What if you had a law where when a black person gets shot, the cops don't care and the public doesn't care, but when a white person gets shot, everything kicks into action to ensure that that thing is handled appropriately? Well, one part of the population would be completely against it and say this is unfair, this is unjust, this is selective justice. You're making one determination for one and another determination for somebody else. If we're supposed to be living in an equal society, how are we allowing this to take place? But that's kind of my point with the law stuff. There are things that the public and the media seems to care about more than others, and they would amplify. So Trump is an ogre, Trump is horrible, mainstream media is against them in spades. All of the channels, with the exception of maybe Fox, for the most part, just champion whatever the Democrats' talking point and perspective is, and they do it to the hilt. It's obscene. The reality of it gets a little bit dicier to determine. Watching the hearings, though, it does come across as if people that they've been calling bombshells on CNN and MSNBC have been getting eaten alive when you look at the larger tape. The Startling interview is one of the most egregious ones. It's like, so you just presumed. Yes, I just presumed. But you realize presuming is not the same thing as knowing, and people said you demanded. Well, I never said that. I wanted Trump impeached. You didn't have to say it. You gave him this narrative. And you look at CNN and CNN is running with it. Yes, I distrust this process because it's a partisan process. No, I don't think the Republicans are going to turn on Trump on this. Yes, I think Trump is going to run on this, screaming that the Democratic Party never accepted him as president. And I think that has legs. Not to mention people being pissed off at not accepting their guy. I don't know if it's a desperate plea to stop Sanders, Wesley, but I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps. All right. Like, share, and subscribe. Nancy Pelosi should be ashamed of herself, and she has to lose the next. I mean, lefties can't vote for her. Can't vote for her after watching that. You can't. I'm sorry, you can't. I don't care what's at stake. she has to lose. That is a horrible response to what is outright war crime by the United States on another sovereign nation. And there was no consequence for that war crime, especially from the standpoint of the people who did it. Nancy Pelosi agrees that, yes, he was lying. No, I didn't do anything about it. That's unacceptable. Like, share, subscribe.